Hey there, fellow soil stewards! If you've been following along on the Soilsage Chronicles journey, you know I'm always digging deep into traditional farming wisdom from around the world. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to share something that completely transformed my understanding of what a truly diverse garden ecosystem looks like. During my recent deep dive into Korean agricultural practices, I stumbled upon an approach to permaculture that's been quietly revolutionizing gardens for centuries. The Korean philosophy doesn't just tolerate diversity, it actively cultivates it in ways that would make most Western gardeners' heads spin. We're talking about intentionally growing weeds, celebrating soil creatures most people try to eliminate, and harvesting wild greens that appear in your garden without invitation. This isn't just about adding a few companion plants to your tomato beds. This is about fundamentally reimagining your garden as a complex, self-sustaining ecosystem where every single organism, yes, even those slimy earthworms and those annoying dandelions, plays a crucial role in creating abundance. Before we dive into the fascinating world of Korean permaculture diversity, we need to talk about the foundation that makes it all possible: understanding soil as a living, breathing community, rather than just dirt that holds plants upright. The Korean approach starts with feeding this soil community first, understanding that when you take care of the underground ecosystem, everything above ground thrives naturally. This means composting everything. Kitchen scraps, fallen leaves, even small weeds get turned into black gold that feeds the soil organisms. What I found particularly fascinating is how Korean gardeners view earthworms not as garden helpers, but as essential partners in food production. They actively encourage worm populations by creating specific zones in their gardens where organic matter decomposes slowly, providing consistent food sources for these incredible soil engineers. Now let's talk about something that might challenge everything you thought you knew about garden management: intentionally welcoming weeds into your growing space. I know, this sounds completely backwards to most of us who've been trained to see weeds as the enemy. But here's where Korean wisdom gets really interesting. Many plants we consider weeds are actually incredible soil conditioners and companion plants. Take dandelions, for example. These golden beauties aren't just tolerated in Korean garden systems, they're celebrated for their deep tap roots that break up compacted soil and bring nutrients from deep underground to the surface. Clover, another plant many gardeners try to eliminate, is treated as a living mulch that fixes nitrogen in the soil while providing ground cover that suppresses less beneficial weeds. Korean gardeners often plant clover intentionally around fruit trees and in walkways, creating a system where this weed actually improves soil fertility. The key insight here is learning to distinguish between beneficial weeds that support your garden ecosystem and truly problematic invasive species. Plants like plantain, purslane, and lamb's quarters often appear naturally in Korean gardens and are left to grow because they provide food, medicine, and soil benefits. This approach requires a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing a perfectly manicured garden as the ideal, Korean permaculture celebrates the organized chaos of a diverse plant community where each species contributes to the overall health of the system. One of the most exciting aspects of Korean garden diversity is the emphasis on foraging and incorporating wild greens into both the garden design and the family diet. This practice, known as permaculture, treats wild plants as valuable crops rather than nuisances to be eliminated. Korean gardeners often designate specific areas of their gardens as wild zones where plants like shepherd's purse, chickweed, and wild garlic are allowed to establish themselves naturally. These areas might look messy to the untrained eye, but they're actually carefully managed ecosystems that provide fresh greens throughout multiple growing seasons. The beauty of this approach is that these wild greens often appear exactly when your body needs them most. Early spring greens like nettle and dandelion provide essential vitamins after a long winter of stored foods. Summer purslane offers cooling properties during hot weather, while fall lamb's quarters provide protein-rich seeds as other crops finish their cycles. Learning to identify and harvest these plants safely becomes an essential skill in this approach. Korean gardeners pass down knowledge about which plants to harvest when, how to prepare them, and which parts of each plant are most nutritious. This creates a deeper connection between the gardener, the land, and the food they consume. Korean permaculture diversity extends beyond plants to actively supporting beneficial insect populations that keep the garden ecosystem balanced. Rather than relying on pesticides when pest problems arise, this approach focuses on creating habitat for the beneficial insects that naturally control garden pests. This means leaving some areas of your garden slightly messy on purpose. Brush piles for beneficial beetles, hollow stems for native bees, and diverse flowering plants that bloom throughout the season to support pollinators. Korean gardeners often incorporate specific plants like cosmos, buckwheat, and native wildflowers specifically to attract and support these beneficial insects. The practice extends to encouraging spiders, ground beetles, and other predatory insects by providing hiding places and alternative food sources. Small piles of stones, pieces of wood, and areas of dense ground cover become strategic ecosystem elements rather than garden clutter. Korean permaculture pays special attention to water management through plant diversity. Different plants have varying water needs and root depths, and Korean gardeners strategically place these plants to create water-efficient systems where plants with similar water requirements grow together. Deep-rooted plants like comfrey and Jerusalem artichoke are positioned to break up hardpan and bring water up from deeper soil layers, while shallow-rooted plants benefit from this improved water availability. Plants with large leaves like squash and cucumber are positioned to shade the soil and reduce water evaporation, while smaller plants grow in their shade. This creates microclimates within the garden where water is used efficiently and plants support each other's growth. Rain gardens and swales become integrated into the design, capturing and directing water to where it's needed most while preventing erosion and runoff. While many permaculture practitioners are familiar with the Three Sisters combination of corn beans and squash, Korean gardening takes this companion planting concept much further. Traditional Korean gardens often feature complex polycultures where 4, 5, or even 6 different crops grow together in carefully planned relationships. These combinations consider not just nutrient relationships but also pest management, pollinator support, harvest timing, and even spiritual or cultural significance. For example, a traditional Korean garden might combine cabbage family crops with aromatic herbs that repel pests, root vegetables that break up soil, and climbing plants that use vertical space efficiently. The key is understanding that each plant relationship creates benefits that wouldn't exist if the plants were grown separately. This requires careful observation and experimentation to understand how different plants interact in your specific climate and soil conditions. Korean permaculture diversity isn't just about cramming lots of different plants into the same space. It's about creating systems that provide food, medicine, and ecological benefits throughout the entire year. This includes succession planting of the same crops for continuous harvest, but also planning for seasonal transitions where different plants take over garden functions as the seasons change. Cool season crops like Korean cabbage and radishes really dominate during spring and fall, while heat-loving plants like peppers and eggplants take center stage in summer. And winter cover crops aren't just soil protection, they become early spring greens and habitat for overwintering beneficial insects. So, this approach requires planning your garden as a series of overlapping cycles rather than just, distinct growing seasons. Plants are chosen not just for their individual contributions but for how they fit into the larger rhythms of the garden ecosystem. So, are you ready to start incorporating these Korean permaculture principles into your own growing space? Well, just start small and observe carefully. You can choose one area of your garden to experiment with increased diversity and, allow a few beneficial weeds to establish themselves and watch how they interact with your existing plants. So begin learning to identify common wild edibles in your area, but always verify plant identification with reliable sources before consuming anything. Start composting everything organic to feed your soil community and, create a few small habitat areas for beneficial insects. Most importantly, approach this transition with patience and curiosity. Korean garden diversity, well, it develops over time as you learn how different plants, insects, and soil organisms interact in your specific location and climate. The Korean approach to permaculture diversity offers us a completely different way of seeing our gardens, not as controlled spaces where we battle nature, but as collaborative ecosystems where we work with natural processes to create abundance. This isn't just about growing more food, it's about creating resilient systems that support both human needs and ecological health. If this approach to gardening resonates with you, I'd love to hear about your experiments with beneficial weeds and wild greens in the comments below. And hey, don't forget to subscribe to Soilsage Chronicles for more deep dives into traditional farming wisdom that can transform your modern garden. Share this article with fellow gardeners who might be ready to embrace a more diverse, ecosystem-centered approach to growing food. Together, we're cultivating not just gardens, but a deeper understanding of how to work with nature rather than against it.